November 8, 1944. The frozen hills of eastern France, 5 miles west of Nancy. Sleet pelted the olive-drab hulls of American Sherman tanks as they maneuvered through the fog-draped forest of the Vosges Mountains. The men of the 761st Tank Battalion, the Black Panthers, hunched inside their steel coffins, engines growling like predators preparing to pounce. Staff Sergeant Johnny Stevens checked his watch and smiled grimly. In exactly 30 minutes, the Germans waiting beyond the tree line would learn that the propaganda leaflets mocking Roosevelt's Negro Zoo had been dangerously mistaken. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the untold story of how America's segregated black tankers shattered not only Hitler's prized Tiger tanks, but also the myth of Aryan supremacy that powered the Wehrmacht's resistance on the Western Front. The Black Panthers had spent 2 years training at Camp Claiborne, Louisiana, preparing for a war many believed they would never be allowed to fight. The U.S. Army had segregated its ranks, assigning African-American soldiers to support roles, cooking, cleaning, and loading supplies. The prevailing wisdom among white officers was captured by a 1925 Army War College study that concluded black troops were physically unqualified for combat duty due to their smaller brains, instinctive cowardice, and inability to control emotion under fire. These pseudo-scientific claims had wormed their way through military doctrine, creating a reality where black soldiers were denied the opportunity to prove themselves in combat. Captain David J. Williams stood atop his command tank, surveying the men of Baker Company. At 32, Williams wore the weathered expression of someone who had spent his entire life fighting for respect. A Howard University graduate with a degree in engineering, he had volunteered the day after Pearl Harbor, only to be told that colored men would serve as laborers, not warriors. 2 years of relentless advocacy had finally landed him command of a tank company, though even now some generals questioned whether black men possessed the intelligence to operate complex machinery like the M4 Sherman. "Check your ammo loads one more time," Williams called down to Sergeant Stevens. "Intelligence says we're facing elements of the 11th Panzer Division out there. At least 3 Tigers confirmed." Stevens nodded, his breath visible in the cold air. "Yes, sir, the men are ready." Williams wasn't entirely sure that was true. The 761st had only arrived in France on October 10th, less than a month earlier. They'd been thrown into combat with minimal orientation to the European theater, expected to learn through baptism by fire. Their initial engagements had been successful but costly. 13 tanks lost in the first week as they supported the 26th Infantry Division's push toward the German border. The Black Panthers were proving their worth, but at a terrible price. Inside the lead tank, christened Brown Devil, Corporal Marcus Washington cleaned his .50 caliber machine gun for the 3rd time that morning. A former sharecropper from Mississippi, Washington had grown up in conditions not much better than slavery. His calloused hands moved mechanically over the weapon as he thought about the journey that had brought him here. "You nervous, Corp?" Private First Class Joseph Wilson asked, loading another round into the Sherman's 75mm main gun. Washington didn't look up from his work. "No more nervous than I was facing those Klansmen back home." The tankers of the 761st shared a gallows humor about their situation. Many had faced lynching threats and violent racism in the American South. Now they were being sent to kill Germans who considered them subhuman. The irony wasn't lost on them. They were fighting for freedoms abroad they hadn't yet secured at home. Thousands of miles away in Berlin, SS Oberführer Joachim Meyer sat in the propaganda ministry, reviewing the latest leaflets designed for distribution among American troops. A tall, aristocratic man with cold blue eyes, Meyer had studied at Harvard before the war, giving him an intimate understanding of American racial dynamics. His latest creation showed a caricatured black soldier fleeing from battle, with text suggesting that Negro troops will break and run at the first sign of German armor. "These will be particularly effective along the Vosges front," Meyer explained to his superior. "Intelligence reports the Americans have deployed their Negro tank battalion there. Our psychological warfare can exploit the natural tensions between white and colored troops." His superior, a round man with thinning hair, nodded approvingly. The Führer will be pleased. He has always maintained that America's racial integration is its greatest weakness. Mongrelized armies cannot stand against pure Aryan blood. Meyer smiled thinly. As an educated man, he privately considered the Reich's racial theories simplistic, but they provided useful leverage. We've included specific instructions to German tank commanders to prioritize engagement with colored units. Our Tigers will make short work of them, providing excellent propaganda material. What neither man knew was that the 761st's tankers had already destroyed several Panther tanks in their first weeks of combat, demonstrating skill that surprised even their white commanders. The coming battle would put their training, courage, and equipment to the ultimate test against Germany's legendary Tigers. Back in the Vosges, Lieutenant Colonel Paul Bates assembled his company commanders for final instructions. A rare white officer who believed in the capabilities of his black troops, Bates had fought against attempts to keep the 761st out of combat. Gentlemen, today we support the 104th Infantry Regiment's push to capture the Rouen-l'Etape rail junction, Bates explained, pointing to the map spread over his jeep's hood. Intelligence indicates the Germans are bringing up reinforcements from the 11th Panzer. They'll likely use the valley here to stage their counterattack. Captain Williams studied the terrain. That's perfect Tiger country, sir. Open fields of fire, elevated positions. Bates nodded grimly. That's why we're not going to let them reach the valley. Baker Company will swing wide to the north here and set up an ambush position. Able and Charlie companies will provide the anvil, driving the Germans toward your position. Williams contemplated the mission parameters, calculating angles of approach and fields of fire. His engineering background made him particularly adept at visualizing the three-dimensional chess game of armored warfare. We'll need air support if we can get it. Those Tigers outrange us by almost 1,000 meters. Weather's too poor for air support, Bates replied, glancing at the low, heavy clouds. You'll have to make do with artillery. The 183rd Field Artillery Battalion will be on call. The assembled officers digested this information in silence. Everyone knew what facing Tiger tanks meant. The German 18mm gun could penetrate Sherman armor from over 2 kilometers away, while American tanks needed to close to within 500 meters to have any hope of damaging a Tiger's frontal armor. It was a deadly calculus that had already cost thousands of American tankers their lives. Any questions? Bates asked, folding the map. Captain Williams cleared his throat. Sir, have you heard anything about those propaganda leaflets? My men reported finding them scattered around our last bivouac area. Bates's expression darkened. Ignore that trash. The Germans are trying to drive a wedge between units. They've been dropping similar garbage all along the line. Williams nodded, but he knew the leaflets had affected morale. One showed a grotesque caricature of a black soldier being sent home in a body bag with the caption, "This is how Roosevelt's experiments end." Another featured smiling German tankers, standing atop a destroyed Sherman with text in broken English, "Send them back to Africa, if any survive." What the Germans failed to understand was that such propaganda only hardened the resolve of men who had spent their lives being told they weren't good enough. The 761st had adopted the slogan, "Come out fighting," and they meant it, against both the Nazis abroad and racism at home. As the meeting disbanded, Sergeant Stevens approached Williams. "Sir, the men are wondering about those Tiger rumors. Some of the replacement crews are getting spooked." Williams sighed. The 761st had received 12 replacement tanks and crews in the past week, mostly inexperienced men fresh from training. Tell them to stick to their training. Tigers are just tanks, not mythical beasts. They have weaknesses like anything else: thin side armor, slow turret rotation, poor maneuverability. We hit them from the flanks, use our speed advantage, and coordinate with infantry to keep their attention divided. Stevens nodded, but both men knew that was easier said than done. The Sherman tank had earned the grim nickname Ronson among troops, after the cigarette lighter advertised to light first time every time, due to its tendency to burst into flames when hit. Its gasoline engine and ammunition storage made it particularly vulnerable, while the German Tigers ran on less flammable diesel fuel and featured better compartmentalization. As Stevens turned to leave, Williams added, "And Johnny, remind them what we're fighting for, not just against Hitler, but for what comes after." The sergeant nodded solemnly. Every man in the 761st understood the double battle they were waging, against fascism abroad and for civil rights at home. Their performance here in Europe would either reinforce or refute generations of prejudice. Miles away, Hauptmann Werner Kessler of the 11th Panzer Division studied his own maps inside the turret of his Tiger tank. A veteran of the Eastern Front, Kessler had earned the Knight's Cross for destroying 27 Soviet tanks during the Battle of Kursk. Now, with Germany fighting a desperate defensive war, he had been transferred west to help stem the American advance. The latest intelligence says we face the American 761st Tank Battalion, his radio man, Unteroffizier Schmidt, reported. It's their Negro unit. Kessler raised an eyebrow. Negroes? The Americans are sending Africans against us now. Propaganda says they're untested, likely to break under pressure, Schmidt continued. High Command suggests we target them specifically to create a rupture in the American line. Kessler considered this information. He had learned to distrust much of what propaganda claimed, especially after years on the Russian front, where Soviet subhumans had fought with unexpected tenacity. We will engage whatever targets present themselves, he said simply. Race makes no difference to an 88mm shell. His gunner, a young volunteer named Müller, was less circumspect. I've heard these Negroes can barely operate machinery. They're being sent as cannon fodder while the real American forces prepare for the Rhine crossing. Kessler shook his head. Underestimating your enemy is the fastest route to the grave, Müller. The Americans wouldn't waste valuable tanks, regardless of who's crewing them. Prepare as you would for any engagement. The German force consisted of 7 Tiger tanks supported by a company of Panzer Grenadiers, mechanized infantry trained to work in close concert with armor. They had taken up defensive positions along a ridgeline overlooking the likely American approach, using the natural terrain to maximize their tanks' long-range advantage. Kessler had positioned his forces carefully, with interlocking fields of fire that would force attacking Shermans to expose their vulnerable side armor when maneuvering. What Kessler didn't know was that Captain Williams had anticipated exactly this defensive arrangement and was already implementing a plan to neutralize it. At 0700 hours, the American artillery opened fire. The 183rd Field Artillery Battalion unleashed a thunderous barrage, 115mm howitzer shells screaming through the morning air to crash among the German positions. Trees shattered, earth erupted in geyser-like explosions, and the acrid smell of cordite filled the air. The barrage wasn't particularly accurate, intentionally so. Its purpose was to force the German tanks to shift positions, revealing themselves and disrupting their carefully planned fields of fire. All units, this is Panther 6, Williams' voice crackled over the radio, using the 761st's call sign. Artillery is shifting to phase line Baker. Commence advance according to plan, over. Inside Brown Devil, Sergeant Stevens acknowledged the order and signaled his driver. Move out, Wilson, nice and steady. The Sherman's 400-horsepower Continental radial engine roared as Wilson guided the 33-ton vehicle forward. Despite being outclassed by German heavies, the Sherman had advantages: reliability, mechanical simplicity, and a 3-man turret that allowed for better crew coordination than the cramped German designs. Most importantly, for every Tiger Germany produced, American factories churned out 50 Shermans. It was industrial might versus technical superiority, quantity versus quality. Baker Company's 12 tanks moved in 3 staggered platoons, maintaining 50-yard intervals to prevent a single artillery shell from disabling multiple vehicles. They advanced through the foggy forest, using the terrain to mask their approach from the German positions on the ridge. Contact right! German infantry, 2 o'clock! The warning came from Sergeant Booker's tank, second in the formation. Stevens swiveled his periscope and spotted the field-grey uniforms of Panzer Grenadiers moving through the underbrush, Schmeisser machine pistols at the ready. Coax, right side, infantry in the open, he ordered. Corporal Washington traversed the coaxial machine gun and opened fire, 30-caliber rounds tearing through foliage and finding human targets. The German soldiers dove for cover, returning fire with their own weapons, though small arms posed little threat to the tank's armor. Keep moving, Stevens ordered. Don't get bogged down with infantry, that's what they want. The real threat materialized moments later. Tiger, ridgeline, 1 o'clock, 1,200 meters. The distinctive silhouette of Germany's premier heavy tank appeared through a break in the trees, a massive, angular beast with its long 88mm gun already traversing toward the American formation. At that range, the Sherman's 75mm gun would barely scratch the Tiger's frontal armor. "All units, execute scatter pattern Delta," Williams commanded over the radio. "I say again, scatter pattern Delta." The American tanks immediately broke formation, each taking a different direction at maximum speed. The maneuver, practiced endlessly during training, was designed to confuse enemy gunners and prevent them from targeting any single tank effectively. The Tiger fired, its 88mm shell howling through the air to explode where Brown Devil had been seconds earlier. Dirt and shattered wood rained down as Stevens' driver navigated through the forest, using trees for concealment. "Circle west, toward checkpoint, Charlie," Stevens ordered. "We need to get around their flank." Meanwhile, Able and Charlie companies were advancing frontally toward the German position, drawing the Tiger's attention while Baker Company executed their flanking maneuver. It was a dangerous role, essentially serving as bait, but the plan depended on convincing the Germans they faced a conventional frontal assault. In his command tank, Hauptmann Kessler watched the American maneuver with professional interest. "They're more disciplined than intelligence suggested," he noted to his crew. "Maintain fire discipline. Wait until they clear the tree line." The Tigers held their ground, their superior range allowing them to engage the approaching Shermans well before the American tanks could effectively return fire. One after another they fired, the distinctive crack of the 80mm guns echoing across the battlefield. An American tank from Charlie Company took a direct hit, its turret engulfed in flames as ammunition cooked off inside. Another Sherman lost a track to a near miss, rendering it immobile, a death sentence on the battlefield. The American advance seemed to falter as tanks sought what little cover the terrain offered. "They're breaking," Muller observed with satisfaction, just as propaganda said they would. Kessler wasn't convinced. The American maneuver seemed too coordinated for a unit losing cohesion. "Something isn't right," he muttered, scanning the battlefield through his binoculars. "Where is their third company?" His answer came in the form of muzzle flashes from the western flank. Baker Company had completed their wide encirclement and now engaged the Tigers from their vulnerable side aspects. The Sherman's 75mm gun might struggle against a Tiger's frontal armor, but from the side, at close range, it could penetrate. "Tigers, reverse! Reposition to face western threat," Kessler ordered over the radio, but it was too late for some of his force. Sergeant Stevens had Brown Devil positioned perfectly behind a disabled German tank, using it as cover while engaging a second Tiger. "Gunner, APCR, right side Tiger, flank shot," he ordered. The gunner loaded an armor-piercing composite rigid round, special ammunition with a tungsten core designed specifically for penetrating heavy armor, and fired. At less than 400 meters, the shot struck the Tiger's side armor just above the track, penetrating into the fighting compartment. The German tank didn't explode dramatically, as Hollywood would later depict. Instead, thin gray smoke began streaming from the open commander's hatch, followed by crewmen desperately scrambling to escape the stricken vehicle. One man emerged engulfed in flames, rolling on the ground in a futile attempt to extinguish the fire consuming his flesh. "Target destroyed," the gunner reported clinically, already traversing to acquire another threat. Across the battlefield, similar scenes unfolded as Baker Company's tanks engaged the German heavies from positions the Tiger's fixed guns couldn't quickly address. The German tank doctrine emphasized frontal engagement at long range, using their superior armor and firepower to destroy enemies before they could close the distance. The 761st had turned this doctrine against them, using terrain and coordinated movement to negate the Tiger's advantages. In his command tank, Captain Williams directed the battle with the precision of the engineer he'd been trained as. "Red 3, take your platoon north to cut off their retreat route. Blue section, maintain pressure from the west. White 6, call for artillery on these coordinates." The Black Panthers were demonstrating a level of tactical sophistication that defied every racist assumption about their capabilities. Their performance wasn't just good for colored troops. It was exceptional by any standard of armored warfare. Hauptmann Kessler recognized the danger too late. His force was caught in a deadly crossfire, with American tanks engaging from multiple angles, while artillery began falling on their pre-planned escape route. "All units, break contact and withdraw to secondary positions," he ordered. "Use smoke to cover your movement." But the American tankers pressed their advantage relentlessly. For men who had spent their lives being told what they couldn't do, this moment, outmaneuvering and outfighting Germany's elite, carried significance beyond the tactical situation. Private Wilson guided Brown Devil around the burning wreckage of a Tiger, positioning for a shot at another German tank attempting to retreat. "I got a clean shot, Sarge," he called out. Stevens confirmed through his periscope. "Fire when ready." The Sherman's gun roared, sending another APCR round downrange. This shot struck the Tiger's rear engine compartment, igniting its fuel and sending flames shooting skyward. The German crew abandoned their vehicle without returning fire. The battle lasted less than 40 minutes. When it ended, 7 Tiger tanks lay destroyed or abandoned on the battlefield, along with dozens of German infantry. The 761st had lost 5 Shermans, a favorable exchange rate that defied all expectations given the technical superiority of German armor. As the shooting died down, Captain Williams surveyed the battlefield from his command tank. Black smoke rose from burning vehicles, and medics tended to wounded from both sides. German prisoners stood in small groups, hands raised, many staring in undisguised shock at the black tankers emerging from victorious Shermans. "I thought propaganda was exaggerating about Negroes," one captured German officer remarked in accented English to the MP escorting him. "How can this be possible?" The military policeman, a white Southerner, found himself in the unexpected position of defending the black tanker's honor. "Those boys from the 761st are some of the best tankers in the whole damn army," he replied. "They just kicked your superior Aryan ass, didn't they?" The engagement would later be described in the 761st's unit citation as the most effective tank action of the European campaign, though censors would ensure that most newspapers back home minimized the role of the black tankers, attributing their success to white leadership or simply ignoring their contribution entirely. The battle marked a turning point, not just in the campaign to breach Germany's defenses, but in the perceptions of those who witnessed the Black Panthers in action. White infantry units that had initially resisted being paired with colored troops now requested the 761st specifically, recognizing their effectiveness in combat. In the evening after the battle, Lieutenant Colonel Bates called Captain Williams to headquarters. "Remarkable work today," Bates said, examining after-action reports. 7 Tigers confirmed destroyed, plus 3 Panthers and numerous infantry. General Patton will be pleased. Williams accepted the praise with professional modesty. "The men performed as they were trained, sir. Nothing more." Bates looked up from his paperwork. "We both know it was more than that, Captain. Your company executed a complex flanking maneuver under fire, maintained unit cohesion throughout, and achieved tactical surprise against an experienced enemy. That's textbook armored warfare at its finest." Williams allowed himself a small smile. "Thank you, sir. I'll pass your comments along to the men." As he turned to leave, Bates added, "Oh, and intelligence recovered these from the German command post." He handed over several propaganda leaflets featuring the racist caricatures. "Thought you might want them as souvenirs, proof of how wrong they were." Williams examined the leaflets, then carefully folded them and placed them in his pocket. "These might be historically significant someday, sir. Evidence of the double war we're fighting." Later that night, in the temporary bivouac area, Sergeant Stevens found Corporal Washington sitting alone, cleaning his machine gun by flashlight. "You should get some rest," Stevens advised. "We're back on the line at 600. Washington nodded but continued his methodical work. "Just thinking about those German tankers. The way they looked at us when they surrendered, like they couldn't believe their eyes." Stevens understood. They bought their own propaganda, thought they were the master race, that we were subhuman. Today was quite an education for them. "Education for some of our white officers too," Washington observed. "Lieutenant Parker actually shook my hand after the battle, first time he's done that since we landed in France." Both men fell silent, contemplating the irony that it had taken killing Germans to earn respect from their own countrymen. The 761st's motto, "Come out fighting," carried layers of meaning for black soldiers battling fascism abroad while their families faced discrimination at home. Across the battlefield in a German field hospital, Hauptmann Kessler lay on a stretcher, his right leg heavily bandaged where shrapnel had torn through flesh and bone. A propaganda officer hovered nearby, notebook in hand. "For the official record, Hauptmann, would you describe how your force was overwhelmed by superior numbers of American tanks?" the officer prompted. Kessler stared at the canvas ceiling. "We were not overwhelmed by numbers. We were outmaneuvered by a tactically superior force that exploited our weaknesses and negated our advantages." The propaganda officer frowned. "That's not consistent with our understanding of Negro combat capabilities. Perhaps your recollection is affected by your injuries." Kessler turned to face the man. "I have destroyed 27 Soviet tanks and 14 American. I know when I've been beaten by skill rather than luck or numbers. Those men were professionals. Their race made no difference to their effectiveness." The propaganda officer made a dismissive note. "Your medical records will indicate combat fatigue alongside your physical injuries, Hauptmann. Rest assured, the official account will properly contextualize today's temporary setback." As the officer left, Kessler's radioman Schmidt approached the bedside. One of the few survivors from their tank, he had escaped with minor burns. "So they're already spinning the story," he observed, "saying we faced an entire armored division, not a single battalion." Kessler nodded tiredly. "Lies make for poor tactical education. The American Negro tankers outfought us today using superior maneuver warfare. Any account that says otherwise does our forces a disservice." Schmidt lowered his voice. "The American prisoners say their Negro battalion trains harder than any white unit because they have to prove themselves, that they study tactics obsessively because they're not allowed to fail." This insight gave Kessler pause. He had seen similar phenomena on the Eastern Front, where Soviet penal battalions fought with desperate courage because retreat meant execution. But this was different, not coercion but aspiration driving performance to exceptional levels. "An enemy fighting for dignity may be more dangerous than one fighting merely for survival," Kessler observed. "Remember that if you face them again." The following morning, the 761st resumed their advance, supporting infantry units pushing toward the German border. In the wake of their success against the Tigers, morale had soared, but experienced officers like Williams knew that overconfidence could be as dangerous as fear. "Yesterday's victory doesn't make today's battlefield any less deadly," he reminded his company during the morning briefing. "The Germans adapt quickly. They'll change tactics now that they know what we can do." Indeed, German resistance stiffened as the 761st pushed eastward. Artillery became more precise, ambush positions more carefully concealed. The enemy was learning to respect the Black Panthers, a grudging acknowledgement of their capabilities that manifested as more determined opposition. 2 days after the Tiger engagement, Baker Company encountered a new German defense in depth near the village of Vic-sur-Seille. Mines disabled 2 lead tanks, and concealed anti-tank guns opened fire from fortified positions. "Back up! Back up!" Stevens ordered, as high-velocity rounds ricocheted off Brown Devil's frontal armor. The Sherman reversed behind a stone farmhouse as German 75mm shells reduced the structure to rubble around them. "Contact right, Park 40, behind the stone wall," Washington reported, spotting the German anti-tank gun through his periscope. Stevens made a quick calculation. "Driver, on my mark, move forward 10 meters, then hard left. Gunner, be ready for a snapshot at that Park 40. He keyed his radio. "Red 2 and 3, we're drawing their fire. Circle around and hit them from the orchard side." The coordinated movement caught the German gun crew unprepared for tanks attacking from multiple angles simultaneously. Within minutes, the position was neutralized, allowing the infantry to advance. These small unit actions rarely made headlines, but demonstrated the 761st's growing tactical proficiency. By December 1944, they had been in continuous combat for 47 days, participated in 4 major campaigns, and established a reputation as one of the most effective tank battalions in the European theater. Back in Berlin, SS Oberfuhrer Meyer faced uncomfortable questions about the failure of his propaganda campaign. The Negro troops were supposed to break under pressure, his superior reminded him, Instead, they've advanced further into German territory than any other American unit in their sector. Meyer shuffled through intelligence reports uncomfortably. The psychological profile was sound, based on our understanding of American racial dynamics. Perhaps we underestimated the selection process for their tank corps. In truth, Meyer was beginning to recognize a fundamental flaw in Nazi racial ideology when applied to military effectiveness. The Americans' willingness to eventually utilize their black troops as combat units, despite domestic racism, gave them access to a valuable manpower pool the Germans had ideologically foreclosed to themselves. We should adjust our approach, Meyer suggested. Rather than targeting the Negro units directly, we could exploit tensions between them and white troops. Our intelligence suggests there have been incidents of racism within American lines. His superior waved this away. The Führer is no longer interested in psychological operations against Negro troops. With the Ardennes offensive beginning, our focus must be on exploiting weaknesses in the American line north of their current positions. Indeed, Hitler's last-ditch offensive, later known as the Battle of the Bulge, would dramatically change the strategic situation. When German forces punched through American lines in the Ardennes forest on December 16th, units like the 761st found themselves rushed northward to help contain the breakthrough. The crisis created unexpected opportunities for the Black Panthers. With commanders desperate for experienced tank units, previous hesitations about deploying black troops disappeared overnight. General Patton, who had initially been skeptical about black combat units, now demanded the 761st for his Third Army's push to relieve Bastogne. "I don't care if they're black or purple," Patton reportedly told his staff. "The 761st knows how to kill Germans, and that's what we need right now." The 761st's performance during the Ardennes counter-offensive further cemented their reputation. In 3 weeks of brutal winter combat, they destroyed 13 German tanks, including 4 more Tigers, captured 26 towns, and took over 400 prisoners. Their ability to operate effectively in the bitter cold and rugged terrain disproved another racist assumption, that black troops from the American South would falter in European winter conditions. On January 10, 1945, following the successful containment of the German offensive, Sergeant Stevens found himself summoned to regimental headquarters. Apprehension gnawed at him during the jeep ride. Such summons rarely brought good news. He was surprised to find not only Captain Williams waiting, but also a colonel from Third Army headquarters and a bespectacled civilian clutching a notebook. "Sergeant Stevens," the colonel began without preamble, "this is Mr. Harrington from Stars and Stripes. He's writing a feature on tank units that distinguished themselves during the Bulge. Captain Williams recommended you provide perspective from a non-commissioned officer's viewpoint." Stevens glanced at Williams in surprise. Press coverage of the 761st had been minimal, despite their accomplishments. "Just tell him about the Tiger engagement in November and your actions near Tillet last week," Williams suggested. "Stick to operational details." The journalist smiled encouragingly. "I understand your battalion has established quite a record. 27 German tanks destroyed, including several Tigers. That's remarkable, given the technical advantages of German armor." Stevens chose his words carefully. "We respect the capability of German tanks, sir, but our tactics are designed to neutralize their advantages. We emphasize mobility, coordination, and aggression." "And do you find that being a Negro unit creates any special challenges?" Williams stiffened at the question, but Stevens maintained his professional demeanor. "Our challenges are the same as any tank battalion, sir. Maintaining equipment, coordinating with infantry, staying alive. The enemy shells don't discriminate based on the color of the tankers." The interview continued for 30 minutes, with Stevens providing technical details about tank warfare, while tactfully deflecting questions about race. When the journalist finally departed, the colonel turned to Williams. "Good man you've got there, Captain. Articulate, knowledgeable, not what many people expect." Williams's expression remained neutral. "Sergeant Stevens has a degree in mechanical engineering from Howard University, sir. Before the war, he was denied employment at every factory he applied to because of his color. Their loss was the Army's gain." The colonel appeared momentarily discomfited by this information. "Well, the article should appear in next week's edition. General Patton specifically requested some recognition for your unit. Says you've been overlooked too long." After the colonel departed, Stevens turned to Williams. "Will they actually publish it, sir? Last time a reporter interviewed us, nothing ever appeared in print." Williams sighed. "We'll see. The Army's still walking a tightrope on race issues. They want to showcase our success, without raising too many questions about why it took so long to let us fight in the first place." He was right to be skeptical. When the Stars and Stripes article appeared, it praised the hard-fighting tankers of the 761st, but minimized their racial identity and attributed much of their success to the excellent leadership of white officers, despite the fact that by January 1945, the battalion had a significant number of black officers in command positions. The real recognition came not from press coverage, but from the men they fought alongside. White infantry units now greeted the arrival of the Black Panthers with genuine enthusiasm rather than suspicion. As one company commander from the 26th Infantry Division put it, "When you see those cats coming in their tanks, you know Jerry's in for a bad day. They fight like they've got something to prove, and brother, they've proved it." In late January, as Allied forces prepared for the final push into Germany, the 761st was ordered to support the 103rd Infantry Division's advance toward the Siegfried Line, Germany's vaunted Western defense system. Intelligence reported heavy Tiger tank concentrations defending the approach, including elements of the 11th Panzer Division that the 761st had encountered in November. During planning, General Patton himself made a characteristic appearance, striding into the briefing room with his ivory-handled pistols gleaming at his hips. "Gentlemen," he announced in his high, nasal voice, "I want the 761st to spearhead this advance. You've faced Tigers before and sent them running. Do it again." Lieutenant Colonel Bates stepped forward. "Sir, intelligence suggests we'll be facing at least 15 Tiger tanks in prepared positions. Our losses could be substantial." Patton fixed him with a steely gaze. "Colonel, did I ask for a casualty estimate? The 761st has the best Tiger killing record in my army. I'm giving you the opportunity to improve it." After Patton departed, Captain Williams studied the maps with growing concern. The planned route would force them through a narrow valley, perfect terrain for the German 88s to engage at maximum range. "We need a different approach," he told Bates. "Something unexpected." After hours of planning, they developed an audacious alternative. Rather than advancing through the valley as the Germans would expect, Baker Company would make a night march through supposedly impassable mountain terrain to strike the German positions from behind at dawn. Meanwhile, Able and Charlie companies would make a diversionary attack through the valley, drawing German attention. The plan required extraordinary navigation skills and driving discipline to move tanks through mountain forests in darkness, precisely the kind of technical challenge racism suggested black troops couldn't handle. But Williams had complete confidence in his men's abilities. "We leave at 0100 hours, he informed his platoon leaders. "No headlights, no engine noise above necessary minimum. Radio silence throughout. We'll navigate by compass and starlight." Sergeant Stevens absorbed these orders with professional calm, though he recognized the daunting nature of the task. Moving 33-ton tanks through rugged terrain in darkness would test the limits of their training and equipment. "Questions?" Williams asked. Lieutenant Jackson, a recent officer candidate school graduate, raised his hand. "Sir, has this type of night movement been attempted before with Shermans?" Williams smiled thinly. "Not to my knowledge, Lieutenant. We'll be writing the manual on this one." That night, under a clear, star-filled sky, Baker Company's tanks crept through mountain passages that German commanders had deemed unsuitable for armored vehicles. Crews dismounted repeatedly to scout the path ahead, sometimes physically testing the ground to ensure it would support their tank's weight. Progress was painfully slow, covering just 6 miles in 7 hours, but by dawn they had achieved what the enemy considered impossible. From their elevated position, they could see German Tiger tanks positioned to defend against the expected valley approach, their massive 88mm guns pointing in the wrong direction. The Black Panthers had achieved complete tactical surprise. "All tanks, engage targets of opportunity," Williams ordered, as the morning mist began to lift. Concentrate fire on command vehicles first. The Shermans opened fire simultaneously, raining 75mm shells on the unsuspecting German positions from their rear. 2 Tigers were knocked out in the first minute, their engines disabled before their crews could even rotate their turrets to respond. German communication channels erupted, with confused reports of American tanks appearing where none should be possible. Their carefully prepared defensive line had been turned, leaving them vulnerable precisely where they thought themselves secure. "Negroes can't navigate," Washington quoted sardonically from the racist assessment as he fed ammunition to his gunner. "Negroes can't handle complex machinery. Guess they forgot to tell us that." The Battle of the Siegfried Line approached would later be described in military academies as a textbook example of how to neutralize superior enemy equipment through maneuver warfare. The 761st destroyed 11 Tiger tanks that day while losing only 3 Shermans, an exchange rate that defied conventional wisdom about armor engagements. By February 1945, as American forces pushed deeper into Germany, the Black Panthers had accumulated a remarkable record: 30 Tiger tanks destroyed, 131 other armored vehicles knocked out, 334 machine gun positions neutralized, and 15 German troops killed, wounded, or captured. For a unit that many had tried to keep out of combat entirely, the statistics told a powerful story of excellence under the most challenging conditions. The Germans, for their part, had abandoned their racist propaganda about black troops, replacing it with tactical warnings. Enemy tank units with white star markings on olive vehicles should be engaged from maximum range. If forward observers identify these as elements of the 761st Battalion, Negro troops, priority artillery support should be requested immediately. On a personal level, the transformation was equally striking. Hauptmann Kessler, recovering in a military hospital near Frankfurt, received regular intelligence briefings on the American advance. When he learned that the 761st was approaching his sector, he advised the local commander, "Abandon standard doctrinal responses. These tankers employ unconventional tactics and excel at exploiting terrain advantages. Conventional defensive positions will not hold against them." The Wehrmacht officer had stared at him incredulously. "You're suggesting we alter established doctrine because of a Negro unit?" Kessler had fixed him with the stare of a man who had seen his comrades die from underestimating this enemy. "I'm suggesting you adapt or be destroyed. The color of the men inside those tanks has no bearing on their effectiveness, a lesson we've learned at considerable cost." As Allied forces prepared for the final push into Germany's heartland, the Black Panthers found themselves at the forefront again. On April 5, 1945, near the town of Hersfeld, Baker Company encountered one of the last organized Tiger formations on the Western Front, a desperate collection of tanks crewed by a mixture of veterans and Hitler youth pressed into service. In his command tank, Captain Williams monitored the tactical situation. "They're forming for a counterattack," he observed, watching German tanks maneuvering into assault position. "Classic blitzkrieg formation. Just like we studied in training," Stevens replied from Brown Devil, positioned nearby. The irony wasn't lost on either man. They were facing a tactical doctrine they'd been told was too sophisticated for black troops to comprehend, let alone counter. "All units, prepare to execute Defense Pattern Echo," Williams ordered. The maneuver, developed by the 761st based on their combat experience, involved a strategic withdrawal to draw enemy tanks into pre-registered artillery kill zones. The German Tigers advanced confidently, believing they had caught the American tanks retreating. They pursued the seemingly disorganized Shermans, pushing forward aggressively, directly into the trap Williams had prepared. "Fire mission, coordinates Delta 73, fire for effect," Williams called to the artillery liaison officer. Seconds later, 155mm shells began raining down, targeting the narrow road junction where the German tanks had concentrated. Simultaneously, Baker Company's tanks emerged from concealed positions on the German flanks, engaging from multiple angles. The Tigers, designed for frontal combat, found themselves caught in a deadly crossfire. "Target acquired, Tiger tank, 300 meters," reported Brown Devil's gunner. "Fire," Stevens ordered calmly. The shell struck the German tank's side armor, penetrating into the fighting compartment. Black smoke poured from the hatches as the crew abandoned their stricken vehicle. The engagement ended in 15 minutes, with 6 more Tiger tanks destroyed, and the remainder retreating in disarray. It was the last major tank battle the 761st would fight, though they continued advancing until Germany's surrender on May 8, 1945. When peace finally came to Europe, the men of the 761st found themselves in Austria, having fought through France, Belgium, Germany, and into the Alpine nation, 183 consecutive days of combat, a record unmatched by any other American tank battalion. In the small Austrian town of Steyr, Captain Williams gathered his company for what would be one of their final formations as a combat unit. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying across the town square, where Sherman tanks formed a semicircle around the assembled tankers, "I've been asked to share some statistics with you. The historical records show that Baker Company alone has destroyed 30 Tiger tanks during our campaign, more than any other single company in the European theatre." A murmur ran through the assembled men. They had known they'd been effective, but this quantification of their success was unexpected. "That's not why I'm proud to have served with you," Williams continued. "I'm proud because you've proven what should never have needed proving, that courage, intelligence, and skill have nothing to do with the color of a man's skin." The men stood a little straighter at these words. For many, the opportunity to demonstrate their capabilities on the battlefield had been as important as the fight against fascism itself. "The war against Hitler is over," Williams concluded. "But we all know there's another fight waiting back home. Take what you've learned here about yourselves, about what you can accomplish when given the chance. The world has changed because of what happened on these battlefields, and it's going to change back home too." The unit's return to the United States in June 1945 brought a bittersweet homecoming. Despite their extraordinary combat record, 183 days of continuous combat, multiple unit citations, 391 decorations for valor including 7 Silver Stars, they returned to a segregated nation. Many establishments still refused service to the very men who had defeated Hitler's master race on the battlefield. In one infamous incident, black tankers who had destroyed multiple Tiger tanks and liberated concentration camps were denied service at a restaurant in Kentucky while German POWs were seated and served without incident. For the men of the 761st, this continuation of racism after their sacrifice created a profound determination to challenge the status quo. Their wartime experiences had transformed them, giving them a powerful sense of their own capabilities and worth that could not be diminished by Jim Crow laws or social customs. Sergeant Stevens, returning to his hometown in Virginia, was told he couldn't apply for an engineering position at the local manufacturing plant, the same plant that had produced components for the Sherman tanks he had commanded in combat. "I've destroyed German Tiger tanks," he told the personnel manager calmly. "I think I can handle your machinery." When denied anyway, he didn't accept the rejection as he might have before the war. Instead, he used his GI Bill benefits to complete a graduate degree in engineering and eventually helped establish a successful manufacturing business owned and operated by black veterans. Similar stories played out across America as the men of the 761st refused to accept the limitations previously imposed on them. Their battlefield experience had proven not just their individual worth, but exposed the fundamental lie at the heart of American racism, that black Americans were somehow less capable, less intelligent, or less courageous than their white counterparts. Captain Williams, promoted to major before demobilization, testified before Congress in 1947 during debates about military desegregation. Asked by a skeptical Southern senator whether Negro troops could really perform at the same level as white soldiers, Williams had responded with quiet authority. "Senator, my men destroyed 30 of Germany's most advanced tanks, machines that were terrorizing our forces across the European theater. They did this while overcoming not just the enemy, but the doubt of their own command structure. I suggest that any American afforded equal training, equal equipment, and equal opportunity will perform equally well, regardless of race." The 761st's legacy extended far beyond their battlefield accomplishments. Their example helped accelerate the desegregation of the U.S. military, which President Truman ordered in 1948, and provided inspiration for the civil rights movement that would transform America in the following decades. In Germany, the impact was equally significant, though less visible. German military analysts studying the campaigns of 1944-45 noted the effectiveness of American Negro tank units as evidence that Nazi racial theories had been militarily counterproductive. One Bundeswehr training document from the 1950s explicitly cited the 761st as demonstration that military capability is determined by training, equipment, and leadership, not by racial characteristics. Hauptmann Kessler, who survived the war and eventually joined West Germany's new military, incorporated lessons from his encounters with the 761st into training materials he developed. The Americans succeeded not despite their diversity, but because of it, he wrote. Their willingness to eventually utilize all their human resources gave them advantages we denied ourselves through racial ideology. For the Black Panthers themselves, their wartime achievements remained poorly recognized for decades. It wasn't until 1978, 33 years after the war's end, that the 761st finally received the Presidential Unit citation that had been recommended by General Patton in 1945. Many of the original tankers had passed away by then, never seeing their unit receive the recognition it had earned. On November 8, 1995, exactly 51 years after their historic defeat of German Tiger tanks in the Vosges Mountains, surviving members of the 761st gathered at the National World War II Memorial in Washington, D.C. Old men now. They stood straight-backed beside a Sherman tank temporarily installed for the ceremony. Former Staff Sergeant Johnny Stevens, his hair now white but his bearing still military, addressed the assembled crowd. People ask if I'm bitter that our recognition came so late. I tell them no. Because what we proved wasn't just for ourselves, but for every person who's been told they can't do something because of who they are or what they look like. He rested his hand on the Sherman's olive drab hull. Inside these steel boxes, we weren't black tankers or white tankers, just American soldiers doing our duty. The Germans learned that lesson the hard way. America took longer to learn it, but learn it we did. The transformation of attitudes exemplified by the 761st's journey represents one of the most profound aspects of World War II's legacy. Men who were deemed incapable of complex military operations destroyed Germany's most advanced tanks. A unit formed as a reluctant experiment became one of the most decorated tank battalions in American history. Perhaps the most telling testament came from a captured German officer who, when informed he had been defeated by a black tank battalion, reportedly said, "I don't care if they came from the moon, they fight like hell, and that's what matters on the battlefield." The men of the 761st had done more than destroy tigers. They had destroyed myths, prejudices, and artificial limitations. In proving themselves on the battlefield, they helped set the stage for broader social changes that would transform not just the military, but American society itself. The irony was complete. Hitler's racist ideology had been defeated not just strategically, but philosophically, in part by the very men his propaganda dismissed as subhuman. The Black Panthers had demonstrated that excellence knows no color, a lesson written in steel across the battlefields of Europe. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.